decision gets made in the calibration meeting, and I've seen some calibration meeting with really shitty. Yeah, I don't know. Call that some arbitrary name. But are we resolving that? Why do you call it resolution? No. Apparently, it's a lot of work for managers.
But they also have marked open on your feedback.
Hello, guys.
Really?
Yeah.
Greg, is everybody from Google there, or we are waiting for somebody else to join?
Yeah, I was wondering why somebody can explain why I didn't get it. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering about something that
Okay, so in the last meeting, we there was a question raised that the duration for the SIG multi-cluster meeting, which is fortnightly, should be reduced. But the status quo was, it was recommended that we should maintain the status quo. And if there is anything specific that we need to discuss, can be put on agenda beforehand. I don't see anything specific on the agenda today. So people who are in this meeting right now, do they have anything specific? And this is with respect to the Federation work group meetings, which have been going on regularly.
I'm not clear what you meant. Are you talking about changing the timing of the work group meetings or this meeting?
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about changing the timings. I was just talking about reducing the duration of SIG multi-cluster meeting, today's meeting.
I think we could just leave it as is, and if we don't have stuff to talk about.
Yeah. So I was just giving a brief. Probably some people missed last time's meeting, and if they were not there, I was just giving a brief recap of the previous one. So we did decide that we'll keep the same time, but if there is something specific on the agenda, it could be mentioned in the beforehand. So I don't see anything mentioned agenda. So if there is nothing, we can maybe reduce today's meeting time.
Yeah, exactly.
I have one thing I wanted to bring up related to cluster registry. With all the talk about sort of changing the focus of cluster registry to be more generic and basically to just provide API endpoints to any Kubernetes style API.
Maru, sorry for the interruption. Apologies. Can people who are not speaking mute? I am having problem hearing it. Yep, thanks a lot. Go ahead, Maru.
I was wondering whether it would make sense to consider using CRDs for cluster registry, which would dramatically simplify deployment and maintenance, because it wouldn't require etcd or separate API server. It could just be implemented by installing a CRD on any given Kubernetes cluster. If the scope of the problem being solved is small enough and the risk of backwards compatibility becoming a near-term issue is low enough, then I think that might be a good approach.
But my viewpoint to this was that cluster registry has been discussed in a wider perspective, where outside SIG multi-cluster, there might be users of the same registry, where installing it with a given K8s cluster. I'm just speaking out loud. I'm not sure if if there might be any repercussions of the same. I don't have any objections to what you are suggesting as of now, Maru. But does it make sense to put this out to a wider audience and take a viewpoint on this?
Yeah, I think I agree. I haven't really been involved in the cluster registry discussions, but what Maru's saying seems to make a lot of sense to me. Is anyone who's been closer involved in the design of the cluster registry, can anyone comment as to why we didn't do that? Because it seems fairly, it seems like the question would have come up before.
I think the scope was
Correct.
just larger. I mean, if you look at the existing implementation, there's a lot of different fields, maybe because it was kind of derived from what Federation was doing. But to my mind, like, I've been following the discussion on the mailing list, or the Google group rather, that's been proposing sort of making it a more general purpose, like registering any API, not just like a cluster API. And that to me is kind of like simplified, like you're cutting away the things that are specific to a cluster and you're just having listed endpoints, which to me maybe lends itself better. So to my mind, like the constraints of having a more complex solution, which suggested not using CRDs, that being relaxed, suggests revisiting.
I actually think that irrespective of the simplification, I mean, it seems like both the previously envisaged cluster registry and the currently envisaged API registry would potentially best be implemented as CRDs. So I'm sort of curious why it was decided not to do that.
I mean, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, no, just to add that it is something that we're looking into. So Jonathan and I have talked about prototyping a solution to use CRDs instead, and it would help simplify kind of to all of Maru's points there. So it is something we're looking at, and I think it can be done and should be done. And it looks like also Greg is commenting that Madhu's in talks with Jonathan as well. It looks like Jonathan's working on a proposal about using CRDs as well.
Okay, and can anyone shed any light on why that wasn't done in the first place? Just curious.
I think, hey Quentin.
Hi, Jonathan.
I believe that the reason we didn't do it initially was that when we started working on the cluster registry, some of the features that have since been introduced into CRDs and are being proposed as features that are going to be added to CRDs and say the next Kubernetes release didn't exist yet. So say versioning, validation, these were not yet implemented. And we didn't assume that they would come so quickly. We figured that it would be probably a longer term process before CRDs replace in an extension API server.
Okay, cool. I mean, one of the reasons I ask is that we're strongly proposing or considering using CRDs for Federation as well. And so if there were good reasons why you didn't use them for cluster registry, those may apply to Federation as well. But it sounds like whatever those reasons were no longer exist, if I understand.
That is partially correct. I mean, the versioning, like backwards compatibility, is still a work in progress. And when I've been talking to, say, Phil Whitrock, he's been like, we don't really have a timeline on when that'll be done. It could be soon, it could be a long period of time. So there's a certain amount of risk for Federation to be assuming that we can rely on that. But it's not, I'm not saying it's not a risk worth taking, but it would have to be carefully considered.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I have one point here. It's Shashi here. It's in context of Federation V1 and in respect to federated ingress. Okay, so given that there is a Kube MCI now, which works for Google Cloud, GCE and GKE. Now the federated ingress controller currently is more specific to this Google environment right now. So I'm seeking an opinion. Can we, shall we make it generic enough to work on any this thing and just federate the ingress to the member cluster, and then collect the load balancer IP and update in some DNS record? Will that be good to make it generalized?
I can give two comments on that. I was involved in the original implementation. I think the one is the thinking behind ingress was specifically that it would not use dynamic DNS, because that sort of federated services do that, and there's some limitations as a result of DNS propagation delays and other things. So ingress was intended to be the sort of more powerful version of that, which didn't rely on dynamic DNS updates. The second observation is, at the time, Google Cloud was the only ingress implementation that really properly supported the kind of features that we needed, namely a global IP address, etc. It's possible that things like AWS have caught up and have features strong enough to provide a reasonable abstraction for federated ingress outside of GCP, but I just don't know. So that's the one observation. Just make sure that the end product of whatever you build on whatever cloud provider is, materially better than federated services, for example. Otherwise, people might just use those. And the second observation is, I understand, and I haven't been following the conversations very closely, but I understand that the whole concept of ingress is very much under discussion, and there's reconsideration of whether we did it the right way the first time around, and there might be substantial changes there. I don't know what the status of those discussions are, but you might want to look in on that and find out what the status is.
Okay. So the main, it is super useful for the federated ingress objects to be behind a single global IP. Without that, like, each cluster will have its own load balancer IP, and then maybe the clients need to target correct load balancer IP to talk to an instance. So I think, yeah, that's a useful thing, but it is also limiting, like, what clusters can be federated. Okay, I think that's a fair comment. But the current implementation is kind of messy. Like, you first federate the you first find out the ingress UID, and then propagate the same to the others, and then federate the federated like ingress objects. That's like looks like a complex thing to do.
Yeah, I implemented that code actually way back when, and yes, it is complex. It's basically it was the only reasonable way to get Google Cloud ingress to work in that sort of environment without making significant changes to the actual ingress controllers running in the clusters, which I think, I don't know if Nikhil's on the call, but so Nikhil took a different approach and basically programmed the ingress, the GCP load balancers inside his tool instead of leaving it to the ingress controllers in the clusters to do. And then I think he had to make some changes to the ingress controllers in the clusters to effectively disable what they were doing. So that would be an alternative approach if you wanted to. But it sort of moves the complexity from one place to another, but it is a possible alternative approach.
Okay, sure. We'll take another look into that. Okay.
Yeah, I know a fair amount about that stuff, so I could definitely help you.
Yeah, I'll have a discussion with you. Sure. And I think there is Megan on the call, who is from Cisco. He was talking something interesting about the load balancer across clusters. You wanted to discuss, Megan?
Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. So I'm from Cisco, and I work on a team currently in the area of edge computing. So one thing that we're thinking a lot about is, related to your question, is how in like raw Kubernetes, so outside Google Cloud, outside AWS, can we configure multi-cluster load balancing? So yeah, we're right at the beginning of discussions on how we could address that, and different options there. But yeah, that's kind of my personal investment in this.
That would be a really valuable feature, Megan, and I'd be happy to help make that happen. I think it'd be great if we could get some of the networking vendors to get excited about this stuff, and I can certainly help with the design and implementation if you need it.
Great, yeah. If we could, get in touch, that would be excellent. Thank you.
I wonder if it doesn't make sense for you, me, and Shashi and whoever else is interested to have a little breakout meeting about this particular topic, federated ingress in particular, because it's kind of been on the cards for a long time, and it might be good to kind of answer whatever questions they might be hanging around so we can do something there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Shashi,
Sure.
maybe you can set that up for.
We shall sync up. Yeah.
I think there are probably one or more interested parties from the Red Hat side, because we have a mandate to have ingress for different cloud providers as well.
Okay, so we'll just invite I think we have a mailing list for the Federation Working Group. If not, we can just use the SIG Multicluster mailing list. You can just invite everyone and just put a little caveat there that only if you're interested in this specific topic. At least everyone knows the meeting's happening.
So is there anything else on the agenda today?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question.
Not that I'm aware of. Just a very quick shout out to Shashi, who found a very embarrassing bug in the existing ingress controller code that I believe I wrote. And thanks for finding that and fixing it. It explains a lot of the weird behavior we saw with federated ingress previously.
Yeah.
I believe you talked about CRDs for the cluster registry, which would have been probably the largest update on the cluster registry side that I had, was being in progress of trying to write up the pros and cons of that as I saw them, and then hopefully sending that out to the SIG hopefully soon. I've been a bit under the weather, so it's not exactly been going quickly, but hopefully this week.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I can also give a very quick update about what we did last week, last week. So we saw a lot of issues or requests around RBAC, how Kubefed handles RBAC access to the clusters. So I was able to give a workaround or give an alternate path where users can actually have different mechanism. Rather than using RBAC, a normal auth could be used, init join or unjoin. So that's done. We were able to finish the vendoring mechanism update. That is done. And we also have been able to update and complete the testing around the Azure DNS provider, which the testing is completed and the PR should be merged in a day or two. So apart from this, yeah, I mean, this is what we have completed in the last week. Yeah, if there is nothing else apart from this on the agenda, or nobody else has any other point to talk, we can close the meeting short. We used 20 minutes today. Okay, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
See you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Ciao.